In order to use Bootstrap, we have to put Bootstrap into our project. And there's two ways to do that. So I will start off in this video with ways number one. All right, so I am at the website, the Bootstrap's documentation website, which is getbootstrap.com, or search for it and you'll come up to the same location. And there's various versions of Bootstrap. And so the most current version is Bootstrap 5, which is what we're going to focus on in this class. The most current version at this point is version 5. The .3 or the whatever is inconsequential as far as we're concerned. There are different versions. We're using 5. This is a relatively new version. So 4 is still, all the documentation is still in place, and there's 3 and 2. We'll look at that a little bit later, but let's talk about version 5 since that's where we are today. And it says, among other things, that here's the download or how I can get Bootstrap into my project. All right, as I said, there's various ways to do that, and we'll tackle the download in another video. In this video, what I'm going to do is what we call utilize a CDN, Content Delivery Network. In other words, rather than having the Bootstrap file local in my project, I'm going to link to the files I need, which exist on an external website, not unlike what we've done with Google Fonts or Font Awesome. So I have some links that are available for me. One is a Bootstrap CSS, we should recognize CSS, and one is a JavaScript. Well, we don't know JavaScript yet, but it doesn't matter if you know it or not, because there's Bootstrap under the hood that's written for us to do cool things that we don't have to write the JavaScript to. So cool. So I'm going to copy these links to the clipboard, put my cursor on the clipboard and hit copied. And then I'm going to create a web page. I'm going to call it index.html. I'm going to get it started with an exclamation point and a tab. And the first thing I'm going to do then is put those links to the Bootstrap and JavaScript files here in the head tag. It looks like a lot of verbiage. A lot of this is, let's look at it and just see. We have an href to a CSS file. So that's not unlike what we've done before. The only difference is the CSS file exists someplace else, and we'll see what this min thing is eventually. And then it says style sheet, great. And the rest of these is just for security over the internet. So all we need to worry about is we're going to copy those into our page. And let's see then how we can implement some Bootstrap. So next I want to introduce you to the documentation for Bootstrap. So we already saw we got put into the download. And the way that the documentation works, Bootstrap has very friendly documentation. And we should always get comfortable with the documentation of any framework or library or things outside of the code that we're writing for ourselves. In this case, we're using Bootstrap's CSS, because remember, we're linking on to someone else's CSS page. We'll see that more in a minute. And this is the documentation on how to utilize someone else's CSS. What do you mean by that? Well, let me see. So on the left-hand side is your major topics. And you can see that this is highlighted, this is bolded in Get Started, and these are the subtopics under Get Started. If we click on, look at Customize, these are the subtopics under Customize, Layout, Content, etc. So I'm going to start down here where it says, I'm going to start on this example, and I'm going to click on Typography. And in the middle here is a bunch of documentation to show me how I can utilize typography. And on the right-hand side, just for a navigation tool, if I scroll, as I scroll, headings is here. Well, headings, this is a quick jump list to whatever's on this page. So I could either scroll to get to headings, or I could have quick jumped on it from this little navigation here. So you'll always see that layout. This is, for this page, I can either scroll or I can utilize a quick jump or see subtopics that are all listed on this scrollable page. All right, so let's start with this H1 part. So H1, if I utilize an H1 tag, then it's going to look like this. So what's really great about this documentation is they're very good about giving us sample code that we can literally copy and paste into our page, and it's going to look like this. And now you have enough skills to recognize these tags. So it's not like at the very beginning of our class, you could have just jumped in and you could have probably, but you wouldn't have jumped in with knowledge, with understanding of what you're doing. So let's just go ahead and implement this H1 just to see it in play. So in my body of my document. I'm going to make an H1 tag just like we normally would. And I'm going to type in hello world. Now I want you to think about what an H1 looks like when you've done this in your own web pages without styling it. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to use my live server so I can see the changes at the same time we're implementing them. And so you should see that already it looks different. The font looks very different than what we do with our own, with our custom HTML, with our pure H1 tags. So it turns out that if we're utilizing a Bootstrap style sheet, there must be something in this style sheet that someone has written that changed the default appearance of what an H1 tag is. And so since we are using Bootstrap and we're using Bootstrap CSS, our H1 is automatically formatted for us to look like this. So let me come back into our documentation. I'm going to add one more idea here. So I would encourage you to scroll through these because they all have really easy to follow samples and examples. But for visual, I'm going to go down here to lists and I'm going to choose unstyle list, which is just going to, as if I had scrolled, get to the bottom of this page. And this is another good example of here is code that I can literally copy and paste, and it's going to look like this. So already we can see that it is a styled list, and it's styled because we are using Bootstrap's defines classes. So that means that in that Bootstrap CSS file, somebody wrote a class called list unstyled and gave it a definition. And so if we use that class name in our UL, it's going to look like this. So if I copy that into my page, and where's my live server? There we go. So I'm just going to copy that into the page and we're going to see a Bootstrap stylized UL. Okay, super cool. So by going through the documentation here, there is many things. Now you have enough skills, right? If you don't need a UL here, a nested UL, do you put it in? No, you know how to delete that. That's the beauty. This gives you an example, and because you are comfortable with this idea of our HTML tags, just like we normally write them, and attaching class names to them, then we're going to get some stylized, automatic stylized for us that we don't have to mess with. All right. So that is how we get Bootstrap into our page. And this is our first introduction to how we use Bootstrap. And then it's all based on class names.